So welcome everybody. I know people are still going to be coming in and that's fine, but I wanted to get started. So I'm Kathy McNally and I'm so glad that you're here. This is Why I March. It's a time for women activists from our area of all different backgrounds to share a little bit about their personal reasons for marching. And by marching, of course, we mean action, calling, whatever you do, any form of activism. This is a time for them tonight. I want to tell you a little story. So we all have to read, and those of us who are in high school, right? Some of you may not be, but you guys. So you remember reading the Odyssey in high school or college or middle school, or maybe you've read it recently. In the Odyssey, which of course is the first recorded literature in Western culture, it tells the story of Homer. I mean, it's by Homer. It tells the story of Odysseus and Odysseus's journeys across the water. And most of us remember Odysseus, encounters the monsters, etc., and the difficult time he has coming home. But there's also a focus on the story of Odysseus's wife, who is Penelope, and their son Telemachus. And Telemachus is a little kid, little boy, and he grows up. So in this part of the Odyssey, Telemachus and his friends, teenagers, are down in the living room, or whatever they call it, and they have a bard who is singing poetry, like teens do today, you got the bard over, your parents said okay. And so the mother, Penelope, comes down, and she says to the bard, you should sing a happier song, because the bard happened to be singing a song about how dangerous it was out there where her husband was and how men hardly ever made it home. So she wanted him to sing a happier song. And Telemachus, her son, a teenager, gets furious. And he says to her, I'm just going to read this. Mother, he says, go back into your quarters and take up your own work, the loom and the distaff. Speech will be the business of men. All men, and me most of all, for mine is the power in this household. That literature, that story written 3,000 years ago, is the first instance of a woman being told to shut up from a man, right? Fast forward to today, just this week, where we read this story about Howard University, in which students are struggling to get housing because they have a housing shortage. And one young student was in line for hours and told that they had run out of housing, which is quite a common problem at Howard. They have some housing issues. And she had been sobbing, and they said, why don't you just go stay with friends on their various couches? And she said, basically, I'm going to be homeless. So she wrote to the college president and told him what happened in a very respectful way. And she said, what do you want me to do? I have nowhere to sleep. And he sent back an email that said, your tone is inappropriate. So from 3,000 years ago and then right to today, we have so many instances of women being told to shut up. And I have a question for you. If Telemachus was here and he said to you, shut up, what would you say? Wait a minute. Telemachus comes in and he tells you to shut up. What are you going to say? All right, that's better.
While I was making Valentines for my friends and teachers, 17 people were killed at a high school in Florida. It took 2 steps. 1, pull the fire alarm. 2, pull the trigger. Should I still feel safe? When asked to speak on the topic of why I march, the first thought that came to mind was, because I can. I can't vote. I can't legislate. But I can march. I can use my body. I can use my voice. I can exercise my First Amendment rights. I can ask questions out loud. Why is it easier for a minor to get a weapon of war than a pack of cigarettes? Why don't our schools do something when they see a student in pain or suffering? Why do I have to follow laws, but don't have any input on how they're made or enforced? How is it that a man who bragged about grabbing women by the pussy became president, when at my middle school, he would have been disciplined? Why do we have higher expectations for our youth than we do for our own country's leaders? Why is a lockdown drill a solution? Why do we let a member of our society get to the point of such pain and disconnection that they would take another person's life? Why do we train girls how not to be raped, but not train boys how not to rape? Why do we expect that boys will be boys and not teach them that respect and compassion are part of manning up too? Why is hate not concerning? How is adding more guns to our gun problem going to fix it? When there's a fire, you don't pour fuel on it. Why don't we accept each other's differences? Why is it not okay to not be okay? Why do we ask, "Are you okay?" and then not follow up with, "How can I help?" 17 school shootings took place in the first 45 days of this year. I marched because nobody is going to make change for us. There are so many problems with our society, and it has fallen upon the youth to speak out and take action. We are known as the overprotected kids of helicopter parents, phone addicts who don't know how to have a conversation outside of Snapchat. Didn't you at some point think that our parents were sheltering us from everything? That I couldn't do anything for myself? If you have been listening, if you've been watching, you should know that is not who we are. We are the generation who is saying enough, who is taking to the streets of Washington, D.C. So yes, I march because I am part of the youth of this country who want change. Understand, I would much rather be sitting on my couch binge watching Stranger Things. But my parents did teach me something. Choose human interaction over social media. Choose life over guns. Choose love over hate. So last year at my school, with our school climate, it's gotten a lot better since, but there were a lot of issues of small incidents of sexual harassment that the students did not feel was being taken serious enough, or it was being taken seriously, but we were not told how it was being dealt with. And once we all started talking with each other and realizing, oh, it's not just one kid, it's our whole community at school, we had had enough, and we walked out, we talked with our administrators, and since then there's a new health curriculum that is now for the 6th and 8th graders to learn about healthy relationships, and we've made a lot of progress since.
So I was going to try and just speak from memory, but I tend to ramble, so I'm going to read this. In some ways, thinking about why I march and why I'm an activist seems obvious. To stand up and be counted, to push back against policies I find horrifying, to make my voice heard. But then I started thinking about how we all have our own personal history with marching and with activism, and I'm old enough to have been around for a couple of historic marches, so I decided to talk about that. So my first march was when I was actually in junior high, which I guess now we call that middle school. I'm dating myself. And my mother took me to Washington, D.C. to a civil rights march. And my mother was not an outspoken person or an activist, so that's a very nice memory for me, although I don't actually remember very much about the march itself. And the next time was when I went with my daughter to the big 1989 pro-choice march in D.C. when it had become clear that Roe v. Wade was under serious attack. We hadn't really taken that too seriously for a while, but it became obvious. So I actually have a button from that march, and it says, "Keep abortion safe and legal." That was in 1989, and we're still fighting for that. And actually we've lost ground. So reproductive rights, and especially abortion rights, have become my particular issue for a couple of reasons. First of all, I myself had an abortion as a teenager before Roe v. Wade, but I lucked out and nothing bad happened. I didn't die, like many women back then, and I didn't even have any bad after effects. I was never ashamed or doubtful about it, but I didn't talk about it much. And the second thing is that my sister became an OBGYN doctor and later an abortion provider, pretty much exclusively towards the end of her career. And my sister is someone who's not afraid of bullying, and she became interested in doing abortions, as she herself says, when they started shooting doctors. And that first doctor who was murdered was Dr. David Gunn. He was murdered in 1993 on March 10th, as a matter of fact, which is his 25th anniversary is tomorrow. So my sister was never conflicted about being an abortion provider, but like me, for a long time, she didn't really speak out about it. She and I talked a lot, though, about her work, and I learned a lot from her, and talking to her influenced my thinking a lot. And lately, we've both started to speak out more. And now we talk about that, and about how we have both found that most of the time, in fact, I would say almost all the time, the reactions that we get are very positive. People open up. They say thank you. And often they share their own stories, sometimes stories they've never told anyone before. So that has been very surprising and encouraging and inspiring. And it inspires me to keep on marching. And I hope there'll be many more marches. And what's in my head as I march is hoping we never go back to the way it was before Roe v. Wade. And I march for everyone out there facing difficult decisions about their reproductive lives. And that includes women, men, couples, families, and children, because reproductive decisions affect everyone. But mostly, I march for my sister and my daughter, for my own teenage self, and for my mother, who took me to my first march, but died too young and never really found her voice.
Why I march. I march because of all the women who have marched before me, including Alice Paul and all the other women. I march for all the women who couldn't march and who still can't march. They can't take a day off of work like some of us can. I march for those, my people in my family, my daughter, my sister, my mother, who had to deceive her father in order to finish high school in Iran, where she grew up. I march for the boys and men who want to break free from their man boxes. I march for the young women who give me hope for our future, that the future will be fierce, including Sophia, who's in our Young Women's Advisory Council. I'm inspired by people like Samantha Bee. She makes me march because weekly she shows us that funny and feminist can belong together. A year ago, I marched because I wanted the then brand new occupant of the White House to know that while he may just have moved to DC, that the Capitol is, was, and will always be our capital, the people's capital. So I march because women lift as they climb, and I hope you too will climb, march, and lift. Thank you.
So why do I march? I am wired, people who know me know this, I'm wired to address injustice of any kind. And I have found myself isolated and ridiculed in situations where a larger group is repressing or deflecting from a real issue at hand. People have perceived me to be too intense or too direct. I'm not wired to fake it or make small talk for long periods of time. So when I march, I'm not alone. I choose particular political marches and protests because I believe in the cause and because I believe in the spirit of showing up to be counted. That's my brain speaking. Inevitably, my heart catches up when I notice what's happening all around me. A feminist in her 90s walking with pain. A child with parents who are raising him to be kind. The parent of a transgender teen. A rabbi who believes in actions as well as words. White people decrying racism. Unexpected allies for LGBT people. Alone? Hardly. I marched in 1983 for the second annual Lesbian and Gay Liberation March in Northampton. This year marks 37 years. Now some people call it a parade. I'm still marching. I will be post-feminist in the post-patriarchy. The March for Women's Lives in April of 2004 stands out for me. At 1.5 million people, it was the largest march in DC history. I walked with this lovely woman with blondish curly hair as we were heading towards where the march would start. At some point, my friend Steph whispered in my ear, "You're talking to Carole King." I kept walking with Carole, albeit with my mouth open. She told me she was nervous because she was asked to sing a cappella on stage, and she asked me which song she should sing. I said that given the enormity of the turnout and the feeling in the crowd, she should sing what? Who said that? Free pen. I feel the earth move. Later when she sang it, I beamed. Steph, Carole, and I marched with Madeleine Albright, Barbara Boxer, Nancy Pelosi, Sharon Gless, Tyne Daly, Natalie Portman, Ashley Judd, and others. I don't march to meet the stars, but I'm not ashamed to admit it was very cool to be in the company of these women who lead in various ways. Of course, everyone here is a leader in some way. At the Women's March in DC last year, I kept thinking about Audre Lorde and how she may have felt, since she said, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and to celebrate those differences." And wow, did we celebrate our tapestry at that march. I am a feminist. I am an ally to communities who suffer injustice and who require allies. I will march for justice all of my life, and for the countless courageous women who marched before me.
I march for my son in the hope that he won't have to fear so many people and things he's bound to encounter. For the hope that he won't lay in bed at night wishing his skin was a different color. For my disabled friends and family, in their right to live without being mocked, overlooked, and denied the basic rights that our Constitution clearly grants. I march for my right to do with my internal organs as I wish without the government weighing in, for the right to love whomever I choose without having to worry that my government might make that love illegal, for the right to adhere to my own religious beliefs without having to register as a subscriber to my faith as if it was a magazine or a monthly mailing list. I march because history has shown that walls don't work, and because I am a descendant of immigrants. I march because there are swastikas on street corners and racists in our federal government. Because I oppose the mass incarceration of nonviolent offenders while rapists walk free. Because I don't believe that any person has the right to touch me without consent. Because I am sick of people asking me what my nationality is as if it matters. Because my brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, my dad and my son are black, and I am afraid of what might happen should they encounter the police. I march because I think water should be safe, abortion should be safe, and worship should be safe. Because I am a single mom who needs affordable health care to stay alive and raise my son so your tax dollars don't have to support his entire future. I march for the woman at Planned Parenthood provided medical care when I was young, alone, and uninsured. I march for the right to be a woman and to enjoy either promiscuity or celibacy or any combination of the two without the world tearing me down because of my perceived sexuality. I march because I've been abused more than once, and I was afraid to speak up or seek out help. Because for 36 years, I lived with fear, and at 37, I am choosing to be fearless. And I march for my ancestors And as my feet pound the pavement, I envision their chains and their masters, and I march to make them proud and to become the dream of America that I imagined they had. When Trayvon Martin was shot, I was pregnant. And so I was on welfare, and I didn't have a car, and I was in a high-risk pregnancy, and I was all alone. My mother had passed. And it took a few years to get a car and get a job and, you know, all of that stuff. But when Trump was elected and the Women's March happened, I literally had I had my first car loan 2 days before. And my friend was in school, and she said, let's get on this bus and go down to D.C. And I went to D.C., and I was like, wait a minute, I can do this? Like, I can actually do this. And so I did.
So why do I march? I march for many things: racial, economic, LGBT equality, the environment, the list goes on and on. Living in Northampton, I'm really privileged. I'm surrounded daily by strong, passionate, progressive women and girls who are trying to make change. But even here, at a young age, there starts to be disparities between genders. I've noticed it in the past couple of years, even with myself, in and out of the classroom. I noticed that even when people would say things that I didn't agree with them, I wouldn't stand up for what I believed was right. It shocked me, a self-proclaimed feminist, that I, too, was falling into the traps of societal pressures. I march because it empowers me. I march for the little things as well. I want my daughters one day to be able to do gymnastics. But unfortunately, there's a strong culture of sexism and harassment. The two go hand in hand, and boy, oh boy, is it not limited to Larry Nassar. There's a gym that we compete against frequently, and the head coach, Dave, is really sexist. Last year, I took a bad fall at States, and I broke my foot, and it was like visibly broken. And as I was sitting there, he came up to me and he goes, "Oh, do you have brothers? You seem really tough." I was appalled and unsurprised when later that year I found out that he was the coach who would slap girls on the butt to congratulate them. I marched to show him that I don't need men. I'm strong myself. Even though I'm honored to be a part of this movement at such a critical time, and honored that even though I'm 16, I'm still listened to and taken seriously. I don't have to tell anyone here that the kids in Parkland are just as smart and thoughtful as any other adults in the room. We are more than the generation that eats Tide Pods. We are beating the adults at their own games. But in Northampton, in Massachusetts, we are lulled into thinking that there is nothing to change. When it comes to gun laws, in Massachusetts, we don't even have red flag laws. How can that be? Kids don't feel safe in schools. The other day, we had a hold in place. It was just for a medical emergency, but we didn't find that out until afterward. When they called it, my first thought was, can I survive a jump from the second floor window? I stopped thinking about chemistry. How can we consider our mission done when kids are thinking about jumping from second floor windows instead of their education? I marched to show the adults that we have had enough of this. We are ready to fight. I marched to raise awareness. I marched because I want my daughter to be able to say, Mom could march, and so she took part in a huge movement. And most of all, in the coming weeks at the March for Our Lives, I marched to remember the 17 people killed in Parkland, but also the 26 kids in Sandy Hook, the 13 kids in Columbine, and the thousands who are killed every year because of unnecessary gun violence.
Hello, thank you Kathy and to all the volunteers and people who made this event possible. Barack Obama's campaign gave me hope. As our nation's first Black president, he shared my values and stood up for a lot of issues that I really believe in and things that matter to me, like racial and gender equity, healthcare for all, climate change, economic growth, and more. Obama's campaign also spoke to me as a millennial, as it was one of the first to harness the power of social media. Twitter and Facebook were only just emerging as tools for political activism. I was born and raised in Maryland. I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2012 during Obama's first term, and it was really a thrilling time to live there, and I felt like there's a lot of political process happening right in my backyard. I decided to earn a certificate in social media and digital activism at Johns Hopkins. And it felt like I was part of a movement and that my vote mattered and that my vote had made a difference. And by the time Obama's second term was nearing its end, I moved to the Boston area. And I felt empowered, equipped, and ready to take action. And so Bernie Sanders' platform spoke to me more than Hillary, so I volunteered with his campaign, and I hosted several phone banks. I was shocked by the number of people I spoke with who said their vote was split not between Bernie and Hillary, but between Bernie and Trump. Months passed, and as we all know, Bernie lost the primary, and the election came. I remember watching the coverage on TV and just feeling completely sick to my stomach when the numbers started turning in Trump's favor. I woke up the next morning and I checked the news on my phone, and I could not believe that Trump had won. I cried. I couldn't focus at work. I was certain that our country was falling apart and that the next world war was imminent, and my healthcare was going to evaporate. This was around the time that I was applying to business school, and thankfully I ended up at UMass Amherst Eisenberg School of Management, and I couldn't be happier with where I am now. Classes are time-consuming, and my group projects are honestly really stressful, but I feel lucky every day to be part of the program and to be learning and growing. I'm lucky in more ways than one. I'm white. I grew up in a middle-class family. I went to college and graduated without student loans, and I have an amazing fiance and a great support network, and I'm thankful for that. But after the election, I really felt unsafe. I feared even more for my neighbors and colleagues who were less privileged than me. These times we live in are trying, but they serve as a reminder of the importance of things like charitable giving, political activism, and standing up for what's right, and doing what all of us are doing here today. This is why, even though I'm a busy grad student, I make time to participate in groups like the Badass Activists of Pioneer Valley, and this is why I march. Thank you.
Why I march. My name is Soltum Dorma. I was born in a village in East Tibet. My parents were farmers. When I was a teenager, I was in a peaceful demonstration by 6 young women. I was arrested and sent to prison. The Chinese beat us every day. We were given little to eat or drink. Because of this treatment, many people died shortly after being released. After I was released, I did not feel safe. I knew I had to flee Tibet. I was able to reach Nepal by working for 6 months over the mountainsides and forests and badlands. Then I went to India, meet Dalai Lama. A year after that, I was able to immigrate to America. Now that I'm an American citizen, I am concerned that our media says so little about the daily suffering in Tibet. Few Americans knew that for the last 10 years, every month, at least one Tibetan takes his or her life to protest the actions of the Chinese government that Tibetans rules Tibetan. Few Americans realize it is crime to start school in Tibet that teaches the Tibetan language or Tibetan history. The penalty for doing that or even talking about doing that is always prison, sometimes for life. Few Americans know that for the Tibetan has photo of the Dalai Lama, he or she will go to prison for 3 to 15 years. This is true even it's just an eye for image. Few Americans know that Tibetans outside big cities like Miracle Service, those and other visitors have the same route. The Chinese plan to destroy Tibetan culture. That is a moral crime. I am inspired to speak out by the spirit of I have found in the United States. Nothing is more precious to me than freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. They are not just words for me. They are what I was denied in Tibet. Most Americans want to see the freedoms they enjoy available in all nations that desire them. Tibet is such a nation. We have struggled hard for our freedoms, but we need outside help. I am not speaking of military actions. Non-violence is our way. I am now safe in America. I do not want to be invisible. I am obliged to speak out by the best in both of my cultures. I have given testimony to congressional committee about conditions in Tibet. I have spoken to many girls. I have spoken to newspapers. Silence is not an option. I ask you to add your voice to fight for freedom in Tibet. Please speak out.
Okay, so this may be a little more about why I stay sane or how I stay sane, since we've heard a lot about why people march, and I echo many of those wonderful and inspiring things that people have said. And I want to go back, unfortunately, to November 2016, that horrible night and that horrible morning. And I woke up, I'd been an activist all my life, and there have been times I've been more active than others, and I was kind of on a, before the election, kind of on a low swing, and I woke up and I thought, okay, complacency is no longer an option here, but what do I do? And I felt the way I felt in some ways back when I was 5 years old. My mother gave me, mother's a mathematician, strong woman, and she gave me this problem. I think she was trying to just get me to stop bothering her. She said, nobody has ever been able to draw a map that needs 5 colors to define adjacent sides. It's never been done. So I immediately started trying to draw this map. And, 5, 6, 7 years old, never drew the map. Occasionally thought I had, and my mother would point out, no, didn't do it. And I kind of felt with this election and all these terrible things that I imagined were going to happen, what can I do? How are we going to stop this? It felt like the 5-color problem. I didn't know what the solution was, and I would listen to pundits and read newspaper articles and go to meetings, and I felt like nobody really knew what the end game is here. And I still don't think that people really know. But over the year, when I haven't been totally crazed or upset, I've come up with 3 things that have helped me, and I hope that they help you. So the first is at least publicly to stay really positive. And I thought, well, maybe a lot of people were complaining and feeling hopeless. I said, I'm going to start a little website, and I'm just going to publish 3 things that people can do every week. So I started this with my daughter, another strong woman, and my son-in-law, strong man. And we started this website called 3 No Trump, and we put out 3 actions every week. And I did this until about a month ago, at which point I lost my other team members who got involved with grad school. But I started writing for a larger CTA site called Rogan's List, where they put out like 20 things every day that you can do. Nobody can do all 20, but you read them, you pick one, you feel good. It's great. Second thing relates to marching is to just show up. I showed up at a lot of marches. I only have 3 minutes, so I'm not going to tell you which ones I went to. But for all the ones I went to, including there's one 2-week period, I went to 6 in about 6 marches in 2 weeks in 4 cities. It was crazy. I know I missed a lot also because there were so many, but you guys went to those, so it's really okay. And that's where I think the third thing is it's about community. That's what made me feel less depressed and more sane. The quote I want on my gravestone is from Rabbi Tarfon in the Talmud, and he says, you're not required to complete what we call in Jewish tradition the mitzvah, the commandment of tikkun olam, which means the just repair or healing of the world, but you're also, you can't just not do it. You can't desist from doing it. You don't have to finish it, but you've got to participate. And this is hard for me because I like to do everything. I like to finish. I don't like being told I'm just part of something. And I was reading some commentary on this to put this talk together. And one of the commentaries I read I thought was really telling about me. It said, don't be so arrogant to think that you can do it. You are part of a chain of thousands of years of making the world a better place. So I march to make the world a better place, but that doesn't mean anything unless I know that all of you are marching as well. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. I am just enjoying tonight. I'm loving hearing everybody's stories and just feeling like I could listen more than I share. But it gave me an opportunity to share with you my history with marching, which when I'm forced to think about it, I think is really special. So I grew up in a large family. I'm the oldest of 10 brothers and sisters. I have 7 children myself. My parents have always been hardworking. My mother stayed at home mom. My dad worked as a teacher and continues to work as a teacher. And my earliest memory of marching was when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And because of the large size of our family, we didn't have a lot. We often straddled the line between poverty and non-poverty. And my parents found it very important that we used what we had, whether that was a privilege in any aspect, to get in a car and drive to the United Nations and to call out and condemn the human rights violations happening in Chechnya. And again, a couple of years later, with Kashmir, a world away, places I never knew existed. And I have pictures of myself, and I'm gonna find them and post them on Facebook. There's a picture of me like pushing one of my little brothers and sisters in a stroller as we circled. And I didn't realize the significance of that probably until I was literally sitting here hearing people's stories. Because I was 13 or 14 when that happened. But then when I was 17 years old and living in the inner city of Springfield, we had a crime take place on our street where 2 little boys were brought into an abandoned building on Central Street, beaten badly and left for dead. They were friends with my younger sisters. They were 4 and 6 years old. And when we found out later in the day what had happened to our next door neighbors, I took notebook paper and I made signs so that we could have a rally. And I was 17. And I joined with the adults in my life, and we went and stood in front of the abandoned building and demanded that the city demolish it. And it just felt natural to me, and it was highly effective. I learned things. I learned that you shouldn't live in a community with an abandoned building, like that's not okay, and that the building should be boarded up, and that should be a temporary measure. And I was shocked that this death trap was here and that nobody cared about us but us. And then in the years prior, I would go to school and go to law school and continue to join people in using my body and my physical presence to amplify human rights violations. And it just seemed like a natural thing. So now I'm a lawyer and a candidate, and I see this type of advocacy as just being sort of natural. And my goal is to march right up to Capitol Hill with all of my authority and hopefully being an elected official to continue not only to advocate, but to change what's happening so that we minimize these human rights violations that we have been protesting since I was a little girl, and for some of us, even before then. I'm so grateful to be here with you all, hearing your stories and feeling inspired. And it also allows me to reflect on where my story fits into our story. So thank you for giving me a moment to sit down and think about that and to really appreciate the gift that my parents have given me. And I can't wait to go home tonight and talk to them about it and say, did you realize just how significant putting us in the car and taking us to the United Nations in 1988 to talk about Chechnya and Kashmir would be in 2018. So thank you all.
Good evening, everyone. I'm up past my bedtime. It's so nice to be with you all, and an honor really to be amongst all of these amazing speakers and activists, and also, as Kathy said, to be one of the co-sponsors of tonight's event. So most of you, or many of you anyway, probably know me already from the Badass Activists in the Pioneer Valley. I'm so proud that our little group has been meeting every single Sunday in Northampton since the inauguration. And I'm also proud that 2 of our members were speakers tonight, Emily and Wendy. And some of you, I'm sure, also know me from the Pioneer Valley Resist Coalition, which is also one of tonight's co-sponsors. We've been meeting every month for the last year, doing some great work together as a coalition. And a few of you might know me. I am one of the new ambassadors for the Sojourner Truth School for Social Change Leadership, another co-sponsor of tonight's event. But I actually want to introduce myself to you as someone most of you probably don't know, and that is as Reverend Hannah Grace. I'm an ordained interfaith minister. And so people often wonder how I became a minister, and that's the story I want to share with you a little tonight. I was 27, and I think like a lot of other young people, I was still trying to figure out my life. So, of course, I started going to therapy. And I began practicing yoga and meditation, and I became part of a spiritual community in Greenfield. But I can tell you, being a minister was nowhere on my radar screen until one Sunday in September, 9 years ago. The service that morning was on listening for our soul's purpose, the thing we're here on earth to do. And I can remember that my mind just couldn't get around that idea intellectually, but my heart was just doing these somersaults inside my chest. And so I remember closing my eyes and taking a breath and hearing this calm and quiet voice within me say, "Your purpose is to be a minister." So I was called. By who or what, I have no clue. I still don't. All I knew was that no matter how much I tried to deny it or ignore it or pretend it hadn't happened to me, it would not go away. I answered the call, and almost 3 years later, I was ordained by the International Seminary for Interfaith Studies. So what does this story have to do with my activism? Fast forward to December of 2016. It was about a month after the election, and I had heard of this group called the Hamilton Electors, and then I saw a video of Alexander Hamilton's 5th great-grandson, and he was urging Americans to organize silent candlelight vigils in advance of the Electoral College vote. I remember thinking so urgently, somebody has to organize this. We need to have this in our town. We have to do this. And then that quiet voice said to me, "You're going to do it." And just like the first time, it was completely unexpected and scary and unwavering. I was called again. And I had never been part of any kind of political activism up until that point, to my embarrassment. But as Barbara Smith said, and I take comfort in this, you can't roll the tape backward. You're here. This is your opportunity. So I have to chuckle a little to think that something that began on a Sunday morning at Unity in the Pioneer Valley has evolved into Sunday mornings with badass activists in the Pioneer Valley. These callings are part of who I am, and they are why I march.
My name is Shanique Spalding, and I am a Black naturalized citizen immigrant from Kingston, Jamaica. My identity embodies my activism, but I hadn't really seriously thought about my identity until the years of 2012 to 2015. In 2012, I attended my first ever political rally. It was for Elizabeth Warren, and it was a rally at First Church in Springfield. There was a line around the block of Court Square all the way back to the highway I was in a line with hundreds of people from Western Mass that I'd never known and never met. I was all by myself. I didn't go there with anyone really. At the time, I was a volunteer on the campaign. I made it up to the front finally, and there was so many people already in the building. They put chairs outside and put speaker boxes out there because you couldn't fit anybody else in. Fortunately for me, the organizer for Springfield at the time saw me, and he's like, "Come on, Shanique, come on." So I ran up the stairs. I squeezed in next to my best friend, who was working on the campaign as well. I squeezed in there, and I remember sitting in that moment. There were labor guys up top. There were huge signs, everybody screaming Elizabeth Warren's name, and Elizabeth Warren was standing there with some of the most renowned Black leaders in Springfield. She was also standing there with Deval Patrick, a Black man. It was 2012, and Barack Obama was the first Black president, and he was actually the first vote I casted as a naturalized citizen. And I remembered in that moment thinking God, this is amazing. I had never seen so many people from so many different walks of life all cheering for the same person, but also the same values and the same things that they wanted to fight for. And I, to this day, cannot tell that story without feeling a little teary-eyed, because it was the most euphoric and most monumental moment of my life to date. And I wanted in that moment to always feel like I did in that moment. And at that point, I had made the decision that this is what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to do something that spoke to me every day like that moment spoke to me, and I wanted to do something that brought so much unity to the world. After that, I became a political organizer, and it was 2014. At that point, I had worked on several political campaigns, including Senator Ed Markey. But 2014, I took on the regional director position for Western Mass for a candidate that was running for governor named Don Berwick. I fell in love with Don Berwick after saying I was not going to do any more things political. I literally made a decision off of a video of him at an IHI conference, and I said, if I do nothing else with my life, I must work for this person. But while I was on that campaign was the first time I experienced really upfront racism. And that moment was also very monumental to me. So in 2014, I went to West Hampton, which is so funny because Donna has already set me up for this part of my speech. I told her that before she left. I'm like, thank you for making that comment about signs in West Hampton, because it has set me up for this part of my speech. But I went to West Hampton to turn in signatures for Don Berwick. And what they do at what the clerks usually do is they take down your name to give you a receipt for turning in those papers. And she asked me to spell my first name because no one can ever spell my first name. So I spelled my first name and I spelled my last name. And I remembered that she left. And she said, I could tell you must be married because your last name doesn't match your first name. And if you've ever experienced racism, the first thought in your mind is right? But also you're you don't know what to do. And I remember thinking I'm in my job position. Do not cuss this lady out. Do not go all Black Panther on her. Don't do it. But I remember just being so appalled also that she thought it was funny. And I remembered thinking as I reflected about that, and I wrote it on my Facebook post, but I remember reflecting and thinking that nothing will ever shield me from my Blackness and the racism attached to my Blackness. And I was angry about that, because the color of my skin brought so much more than just the beauty of who I am and my ancestry, but it also brought a lot of racism. And that was attached to my name. That was attached to my skin tone. But that was so true about so many other things in my life. I will never escape the inequities that comes with the fact that I'm a woman, or the inequities that I will face forever because I'm an immigrant in this country. And it's those reasons why I decided to be an activist, why I continue to march, and it's why that I'm doing the work that I do now for Planned Parenthood, because I get to fight. What was asked of us to talk about was what are our fears? And my fear is that this battle has now become so overwhelming, I often feel like, do I have the energy to fight this fight? Can I march another march? Am I tired of marching? I really am. I like to wear heels, and so I'm always marching in sneakers. I'm super uncomfortable. I don't feel right in them. But I'm marching anyways with so many beautiful black and brown people and so many people that are in this room I have marched with. But I'm tired of marching, but I know that I have to march, right? And what motivates me is a quote that I think about, and it comes from the movie and the play For Colored Girls. And it says, being alive and being a woman is all I've got. And that's exactly why I march. Being alive and being a woman is all I've got.
I totally got oversold. So I actually work at Hampshire College. I'm one of the coordinators for wellness programs there. But I volunteer with Planned Parenthood. Previously, I was a clinic escort for Planned Parenthood, and now I'm a speaker. But it was really a wonderful, powerful experience being a clinic escort for Planned Parenthood, because it's about escorting people through a lot of protesters to come and have a doctor's appointment. And then it was really interesting that then a year after I had been doing that work, I needed them to walk me through it too. And so it was really, I mean, of course, as Kathy said, I was born and raised in Alaska. Really, you know, my parents' house was right next to a scrap metal junkyard. And so you learn to do with what you got and make what you have last. So, and it was a very conservative Mormon upbringing that I had too. University of Utah. People always wonder how I get there. It was the only, Utah was the only place that my parents let me apply to college. And so it turned into a moment of always growing up hearing, you know, when you'll be a mom, when you'll be a mother. You know, I don't know if that really is appropriate clothes to be wearing for someone who will someday be a mother. Is that really a profession that's going to attract someone who can afford for you to be a stay-at-home mom? Like, always about, like, I mean, being a mom was not, it was not an eventuality, it was inevitability. And so when I was 35 and I'm sitting in the bathroom and that pregnancy stick turns blue, the last thing I thought would come out of my mouth would be, fuck, man. And my entire brain went fuzzy, all very, very fuzzy. And I remember I got up and was pacing, and I'd already had an appointment set with Planned Parenthood to do a routine STI exam. And I went to the door, crap, don't have my keys, go back, get my keys. Come back to the door, crap, don't have my purse, go back, crap, don't have my chapstick that I need. All the things that you need, right? You just need the securities when you go and have your brain thinking a million things. So I went to the appointment and, you know, all good with STIs. Thank you, but the pregnancy was confirmed. Yeah, I was pregnant. And it was not like those pregnancy commercials where you are hugging your mom and you are crying with joy. I was an animal in a cage. I felt very, very trapped. And I'm a cis white woman with a graduate degree, but I was in Boston. I just moved there. I was working a temp job. I had no health insurance. And I certainly did not have savings in my pocket for $650 for an abortion. And I knew someone who actually was connected to the Eastern Massachusetts Abortion Fund. And so they were able to help me connect with health insurance that could cover the cost of my abortion. And I remember from the time I found out that I was pregnant, from the time that I scheduled my abortion appointment, it was 1 week. Man, what a week. Even though I knew exactly what I wanted, I knew that this was exactly what I wanted to do. It didn't make it easy, right? So I have a coworker drive me to my appointment and drop me off. Sweetly have one of the clinic escorts offer to walk me through the processors. I thankfully say yes, just gratefully. And as my 2-hour appointment goes on, I am so thankful that at every step of the way, I had someone ask me, would you like to go home or would you like to continue your appointment? And I'm like, no, I'm good. Okay. Next phase, talk about some other things, talk about some more options. no waiting periods. I mean, shame that we don't have a buffer zone now, but still no waiting periods. And by the end of the appointment, it gets to the part where they say, would you like to, you know, you've chosen to have a medication abortion, would you like to have, you could take your first pill here in the clinic, and then we send you home with the last pill to take at home. And would you like to continue? And I say yes. My consent is asked every step of the way. And so as I go to the front desk and, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna go home, it's gonna be, you know, this cage will open and I can move forward with the life that I'm choosing. And I remember the receptionist asked, oh, would you also like to pick up your birth control? You submitted a request for the type of birth control that you like. Would you like to pick it up here or at your pharmacy? I was like, please, one less trip for me. I would love to pick it up here. And I'm thinking, sweet, this saves me a trip. She's gonna give me 3 months supply. You know, this day isn't that bad. And then suddenly she comes back and hands me a big bag. And it's a year's worth of birth control. And all I thought was, you are in the prevention and treatment business. Thank you so much. And that was what I needed in that moment. Was not, we're here when you need another abortion, which I know they are. But we're here when you want to prevent that. And that's why I march. That's why I know that I can have that self-determination for myself. I can choose where my life goes. I can, you know, not be that person who grew up and didn't know my options and made choices thinking that they were my only choices. And the one thing I do remember was very odd. It was very out of place for my mother to do, but I remember being 8 years old. I was the youngest of 4. And I remember my mother calling us all around this kitchen table and saying, kids, I need to teach you something. We're like, okay. She pulls out a banana and a condom. For my very conservative Mormon mother, we're all just like, excuse me, what? And she starts with with the premise, you know, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and I don't want to, you know, and I may disagree with this, but I don't want decisions that you make that could end your life. So if there's a way to prevent this, I want you to do it. And I remember it wasn't until I was older that I realized what she was even talking about. Because HIV and AIDS was a big thing. I mean, I'm 37 now, I'll be 38 this year. So, you know, in 1988, that was HIV and AIDS was a big thing. And so when we think about it, big things change people. People were scared, people were dying. People didn't know what to do. But my mother, who, you know, did her bachelor's degree in nursing, knew that condoms would do something. And even though she disagreed with it, she knew it worked. And so big things like this, they change people. And we have this beautiful, wonderful moment to be able to direct that change in a positive way. So I'm so happy that we're all here. I'm happy that we're doing this because it means something. Thank you so much.